You're listening to the Valley Current.
And Jack Russo here.
Hi, how are you?
Pretty good. What's new?
How's your mom?
Oh, she's just getting very cranky and told me again, take the pillow and do me in. And I don't know, it's kind of weird when you have someone that's so sort of upset with the aging process, I guess would be the right way to put it.
Is she in pain?
No, she's not really in pain. She's more like feeling some, I guess I would say, some sense of boredom.
Is she bedridden?
Yeah, she's bedridden mostly. She doesn't want to get up. She gets served everything in bed. You know, we have some help, full-time help in the house doing that.
My mother was that way, but she was not wanting to die.
Yeah, it's an interesting aspect. I guess she's bored with TV. I think I told you I got her this device that allows her to talk to Google about music, asking for music, and then the music will come up, you know, that's voice recognition, sort of the way it exists on Amazon, and a bunch of different products are out there, like Siri is out there for Apple. And she actually was enjoying that for a while, but now she's gotten very picky because she wants specific songs, and Google can't tell that she wants exactly what she wants. So she wants, like, there's a version of Willie Nelson singing with Julio Iglesias, All the Girls I Loved Before. It's pretty funny. Like, this is very specific duet. And of course, sometimes they get it right, and most of the time they get it wrong. And she's like, you know, I don't like it when they get it wrong. And I'm like, come on, this is pretty amazing that you could use your voice at all to ask for anything, and, you know, not ask a servant to say. So she said to me, and you'll get a kick out of this, Len, she said, just get me a damn CD player and get me all my CDs. I can put the CD in the player and I can plug. Why
don't you do it?
That's what I'm going to do. But you know what? It's actually hard to find these devices. They're not on the market anymore. The first request, Len, was get me an audio cassette player and find all my audio cassettes, you know, the little square cassettes. You can't even find those anymore. You can't even find the players anymore. Maybe on Amazon or eBay, you find a used one.
You can get them. The technology, of course, has changed.
Right.
You can get the old devices.
No, so I thought I was doing something great because I got her an iPod and loaded all the music on the iPod. And she said, you know, I don't want an iPod. I want something that I could physically put the cassette or the CD into. Like, there's this tangibility. It's like these people that still believe in vinyl records. They have big collections of vinyl records, and they say the quality of the music on the vinyl record is so much better.
I have a whole bunch of them. Yes.
And of course, you know, years ago, we used to think, oh, it's such a pain. You have to clean them and you have to clean the needle. But there were people who were connoisseurs, and I guess it's starting to return, that you can get a really high quality player, and the vinyls apparently make somewhat of a difference to the audio files. But it's not about the quality of the sound. It's much more the control. You have a lot more control.
Well, how can she do that when bedridden?
Right. Because then there'll be another thing, like, where do we stack all these CDs? And, you know, food will get on them. You know, it's all the classic stuff. You're living out of your bedroom. Your bedroom becomes like, you know, the playpen for.
My mother lived that way for 10 years.
Well, your mom lived to like 107, right? Didn't she? 106.
Yeah.
And she was bedridden from age 96 forward?
I think so, yes, because she was bone on her knees.
Ouch.
And so she couldn't walk. but she could get into a wheelchair, and I used to take her around the city, actually,
Right.
in her wheelchair to her favorite stores and to flower shows and things like that, just to get her out of the house.
Right. Yeah, I think that's sort of one saving grace she said to me is, well, look, I used to walk with my cassette Walkman, literally that device that Sony innovated and then lost the market. Really, Sony should really have been the developer of what became the iPod and the iPhone and the iPad. Sony was way ahead on microelectronics and audio for a long time. And they just lost it. The Walkman is still a good trademark, but I don't think they actually have it on anything. But do you think your mom would have lived even longer if she had taken these, what are they called? Hyperbaric oxygen treatments? That's the topic that we're talking about today because of the article I sent you.
I did know, he's now deceased. There was a fellow at the University of California, Santa Barbara, who pioneered that kind of barrier work.
Right.
And at the time, this was about 40 years ago, maybe 50 years ago, the belief was that hyperbaric treatment would help in deferring dementia. And there was some evidence that that was in fact happening. But it then faded away and has now been resurrected. But it's got, the evidence is weak, very weak.
Well, I sent you the paper that was done by a group that looks like they were mostly out of Israel, is what it looks like to me. It's an October, November paper that was done by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. It looks like 12 different authors on it.
It's even if it was correct, you have to wait until it gets confirmed by others. And I doubt it will.
So you're saying, look, this, I'm putting it up on the screen. The title of the paper, because we'll probably put it in the show notes, is Hyperbaric Oxygen Therapy Increases Telomere Length and Decreases Immunosenescence in Isolated Blood Cells, a Prospective Trial. And it's got all these various authors.
Well, increasing telomere length is meaningless. We don't know what that means, if in fact it has been demonstrated. And it could be based on what we do know about the expression of telomerase, that maintaining telomere length constant is a property of cancer cells.
Right.
And the expression of telomerase, I don't know that they even studied expression of telomerase. It's just a mishmash of ideas with very little to support it. So I have little confidence in that, what they're claiming in that paper, and they're really not claiming anything with a great enthusiasm.
Well, they got the paper published in a journal I didn't even know existed until I saw the paper. It's called aging-us.com. I guess that's the website. Aging 2020 research paper. Well,
there are all kinds of places where you can publish a paper. It is possible to publish any paper in any journal now. There are a whole bunch of journals that have been invented by people mostly in India. All kinds of journals. I get at least one request a week or a day to publish in these fake journals that charge you a publisher's fee because they're in it to make money.
Oh, it's like a vanity press. It's become like a vanity press.
I never heard of this. So
yeah, I was kind of curious about that. I was kind of curious whether you had ever heard of this.
That's been being fought now by the scientific community and by There have been editorials written about it. So you can get any paper you want published. And some legitimate scientists have tested the system by inventing papers, sending them to these fake publishers and getting them published.
Right.
And proving that they were not peer reviewed or reviewed at all, because the publisher of those fake journals are in it to make money. They'll charge you a few $100s to get your paper printed in a fake journal.
Right.
So, and this, I never heard of this alleged journal. Even if it exists, I haven't looked at that website.
Okay. Well, let me read you a portion of this just to get your reaction. It's this first full paragraph on, I think it's page 5 or 6 of the paper. Hyperbaric oxygen therapy is a well-established treatment modality for non-healing wounds, radiation injuries, as well as different hypoxic or ischemic events such as carbon monoxide toxicity, infections, etc. In recent years, a growing evidence from preclinical as well as clinical trials demonstrate the efficacy of what they're calling HBOT, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, for neurological indications, including idiopathic sudden sensorineural hearing loss, post-stroke, post-traumatic brain injury, central sensitization syndrome, fibromyalgia syndrome, and age-related cognitive decline, your point that you began with, and animal models of Alzheimer's disease. For the first time, the current study aimed to evaluate the physiological effect on the cellular level in aging humans without any functional limiting disease. They just had 30 patients, so it's a pretty small sample. But what I'll tell you is I do think there's a number of storefronts that are actually opening up these spas where people will get some form of this oxygen, what they're calling HBOT, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, even while taking a drip of what are essentially vitamins in a drip form, like literally a needle dripping vitamins as though you're getting some hospital-like care. So instead of just a shot of a B12 vitamin that you sometimes get from a medical doctor, particularly if you're dieting, I've seen that. I've actually had that occur. You can get this drip of essentially a bunch of different vitamins. I don't know how much of that just whacks through your system, but they're building it in a way to sort of set up a subscription model where you have the ability to go in weekly or monthly on whatever approach you take, and supposedly you're going to get rejuvenated in a spa-like fashion. That seems to be where we're headed as a society. Now, I don't know what your reaction to that. You've lived already into your 90s, and your mom lived to 106, so the odds are pretty good that you probably lived to 110, given that you take care of yourself, you eat in a healthy fashion, you're quarantining away from anyone that has the virus generally. I think you've taken a lot of precautions. But maybe you'll say, nah, who needs more vitamins? Who needs more oxygen? Who needs any of this stuff? It's not that cheap, too. I want to say probably it would run at least $5,000 a year, depending on the number of times you would go in. But there are people that are doing it and spending that money. What's your reaction to that?
Well, you cited a single offering for all kinds of therapies that has been going on for at least a century that I'm aware of. And in fact, I wrote about this in one of the chapters in my book. There's no limit to the gullibility of people for treatments like this, and even worse, when you find a paper that says what they've discovered will positively affect a multiplicity of pathologies, that should immediately raise a red flag. And furthermore, if that was true, what you just read, I can assure you that every physician in every developed country would be using this technology. When was this paper published? Recently?
Yeah, it's like October, November of 2020.
Well,
like
certainly in the last 6 months since that was published,
right.
There would be headlines all over the world announcing the benefits described in this paper. That has not happened.
Right.
Go back to the 1920s. And I think I discussed this with you earlier. There were treatments using monkey testicular glands.
Mm-hmm.
And even more recently, at a place in Switzerland whose name now escapes me, but you can find all this on the internet. La Prairie, it was called, in Switzerland, where the tissues of, I believe, embryonic goats were ground up and injected into people who believed that this would somehow delay the aging process.
Right.
That company, I think that company is still in business, in fact, in Switzerland. They advertised that the Pope had been there for treatment, the then present Pope, and other dignitaries who they named had been there for treatment. And the treatments cost in the thousands of dollars because it wasn't just one treatment. They wanted you to come back multiple times.
Right.
To benefit from that kind of income. But this has been going on for hundreds of years. There's nothing new about it. If it was true, you would know by now that it was true because you would find it in the legitimate medical circles, and you don't find it there ever. It's all nonsense and trading on the ignorance of people. And it goes back to the old saying that at least in this country, and probably in every developed country, nobody ever lost money underestimating the intelligence of the people in this country, and I'm sure in other countries. So that's even manifest today in the numbers of companies now forming what appears to be an industry based on my work, namely my discovery of senescent cells and the recent observation that these cells, which I first discovered in vitro, are now found in vivo, which means in animals. And a whole industry has developed with startup companies whose numbers now have exceeded my ability to count them, and these companies are based on the belief that they can develop a treatment to get rid of the senescent cells in humans and therefore intervene in the aging process.
Right. Sort of like taking the senescent cells, scraping them out, and somehow making room for live cells.
Getting rid of them chemically or immunologically.
Right. I mean,
and that idea, it sounds logical, but once removing those cells, you're undoubtedly going to find that other cells will move in to become senescent cells also, and that will go on indefinitely because of the numbers of cells in a human body. I mean, what's more important is that the establishment of this entire industry of literally hundreds of startup companies at this moment, based on that belief, is evidence for the belief that you can become rich by founding these companies that will never succeed in what their goals are stated to be, but you will become rich by attracting purchasers of your stock.
Oh yeah, that definitely there's so much interest in.
That's what all of this is based upon. That's why these startup companies are existence in so many numbers, because that's what they're based on. But this goes back to the gold rush in San Francisco, for example. Companies and the silver rush as well didn't make money on discovering silver and gold. They made money on selling stock to gullible buyers based on the belief that they could discover silver and gold.
Right.
So there's nothing new about this approach.
Well, do you think the fact that there's more and more people sort of pursuing it means just by the law of averages or luck, something new might come out of this? Like if you look at when people are drilling around or snooping around or probing around, even by surprise, as you know, you yourself were surprised by what happened in your lab, there can be something that just happens. Like they just happen to fall upon something. Do you think that the fact that there is so much attention means the odds are we will see something interesting come out of this, even if there'll be a lot of mistakes and a lot of money lost? And there's been a lot of money lost. It used to be called snake oil. And I suppose the vitamin industry, the nutraceutical industry, the number of products that are on the shelves. If you just walk up and down a Walgreens or a Long's drugstore, I mean, those are not FDA approved. Most of them are not FDA approved products, but they line the shelves. And I mean, people want some magic bullet. I don't know that there is a magic bullet, but there's certainly enough people that are drilling around trying to believe they'll find something, right?
Yes, it's no different than what people believe who buy perfume.
Well, there's definitely the perfume industry wants to, and the cosmetic industry wants you to believe that you can have perfect skin and perfect smell and perfect everything, attraction, if you just use that product. I mean, in a big way, right?
Of course. I mean, they're selling you a dream. And
well, everyone wants a slice of hope, right?
They're making billions of dollars doing it.
Well, if they perceptually create a sense of hope, maybe there is something that plays out as a result. I mean, I'll give you the logic. So let's say you go to one of these HBOT bars, hyperbaric oxygen therapy bar, and you get a drip of some vitamin concoction, and maybe you get a B12 shot. And then in your head, you're thinking, you know what? I'm going to lose weight, so I'm going to only have one meal a day, or I'm going to have only 2 meals a day. I'm going to skip dinner and sleep better. You might end up improving health span, not so much from the actual physiological injections or the additional oxygen, but from the change of attitude about food and nutrition and the degree to which you eat. And maybe you start losing weight and you start, improving your exercise regime. So maybe it has sort of all this indirect benefit that may play out. Is there anything to that, do you think?
I don't know of any evidence for it, even though it might make good intellectual sense and good logic. I don't know that there's any evidence for that possibility.
Well, I thought there was some evidence out there that generally said as you lose weight as you get older, like mice in particular that were put on strict diets, seem to have this ability to have certainly longer lifespans, maybe not so much longer health spans, but this view that as you sort of decrease the stress, on your
called calorie restriction.
right?
It's called calorie restriction.
Right. Isn't there some evidence of that?
Well, there's evidence that needs to be interpreted properly.
Okay.
One of the arguments that I've made in my objection to the definite conclusion that caloric restriction increases longevity is the following argument.
Okay.
And that is that virtually every animal has a lifestyle of feast or famine. Long periods of famine, short periods of feasting. And that does not exist with humans who are feasting constantly, at least in developed countries.
Right.
And most people. So what has been discovered by these caloric restriction experiments in laboratory animals is the opposite of what they've concluded. And that is that what has been discovered using caloric restriction amongst laboratory animals is the true situation of those animals living under feral or wild conditions. So you simply have rediscovered the lifestyle of those animals under natural conditions, and that those conditions might have the possibility of those animals living much longer under those conditions of feast or famine. However, the critical point is that all feral animals do not age. There's no evidence that feral animals age because they are killed soon after reproductive maturation or raising offspring to adulthood if that's required, so that they don't experience the aging process. And I've mentioned this to you several times in the past. That is that aging is a phenomenon unique to humans and to the animals we choose to protect, zoo animals, domestic animals, and pets. So that, getting back to caloric restriction, what is being discovered by caloric restriction is the true, if you can call it that, longevity of feral animals if they were given the possibility of surviving accidents, predation, and disease. And we know that happens when you put them in zoos. There is a whole, you can look up societies or groups or whatever they call themselves of people who are practicing caloric restriction. You can look that up on the internet. You find several large groups of people who are practicing this. One of the downsides, if you could call it a downside, and I certainly would, is that the libido becomes diminished considerably under those circumstances. And there's a lot of other negative aspects to caloric restrictions. And you can find them occurring if you look them up on the internet. That is, people who are actually doing this and have been doing it for years.
So you're saying there are trade-offs, if I'm hearing it right, and people who are practicing it do believe that the trade-offs, the longevity, lifespan, health span trade-offs are worth it, even if it has a negative effect on your libido and maybe also on your appetite, right? You're essentially becoming...
Well, I'm sure that some do, and I'm sure that some don't, because this observation was made just about 10 years ago, I think. And I haven't looked at the behavior of these people in the last 4 or 5 years. So maybe there's some surprises there for me. But I think it would be useful to look at the websites of those people who have been practicing caloric restriction for many, many years and see how happy they are in doing it.
Well, because ultimately, I think your point is very similar to the typical Italian point, which is, hey, I want to live a happy life and a healthy life, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the longest life.
Exactly.
I'm not going to be miserable by being so tough-minded. Like the very funny thing I often hear from people who are told, well, you really shouldn't have any alcohol because alcohol, some doctors say, is like putting a bullet in your head. And that includes even a glass of red wine, for which there's all sorts of suggested studies out there that a glass of red wine now and then can actually be a health benefit. But the strict-minded medical doctors that say no alcohol, no sugar, no salt, no white flour, no flour at all, no carbs, no meat, nothing with eyeballs, no fish. I mean, you can go down a list. It gets to be pretty long. And you're essentially then a plant-based individual getting plant-based protein, and that's all you're doing. And there'll be a lot of people that will say, well, maybe I'll live an extra 10 years, but it's like the other 80 or 90 that I'm going to live without those various items is going to lead to a certain degree of unhappiness. And that's ultimately a personal choice, right? It
reminds me of an article that was published about 15 years ago when physicians working in hospitals reported, at least in one or two papers, that physicians in the hospital who didn't use the elevator and walked up and down the stairs within the hospital to get up to higher floors, that the exercise was beneficial. And they showed that allegedly, according to this paper, I think you can find it online, the benefit was something like 1 year or 1.5 years of additional longevity for those physicians who ran up and down stairs as opposed to those who took the elevator. And right. The conclusion was that the additional 1.5 years would be spent running upstairs.
Right. That's right. And, at the end of the day, it would be like, well, that's...
If you like to run upstairs for an additional year of life, that's fine, do it.
Right.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.